people can log in when it's more convenient for them so we can get all this good information out.
All right, we should be good.
All right. Well, hello. I'm Nicole Poulin. I'm Executive Director for the Family and Children's Trust Fund, or FACT of Virginia. Thanks for joining us for our Lunch and Learn session today as we close out Child Abuse Prevention Month by learning more about Virginia's Office of the Children's Ombudsman. To help us do that, we're lucky to have the director of the office join us. Eric Reynolds is here. He's the first director to serve in this position since the office got started a few years ago. Before that, Eric served the Commonwealth in a number of different ways, including as a staff attorney with the Court Improvement Program of the Executive Secretary of the Supreme Court and the Office of the Attorney General, where he represented state agencies and advised them on issues related to families and children. So thanks for joining us, Eric. We really appreciate you being here. Just a couple of housekeeping things. We're going to just be taking questions through the chat. We're going to try and monitor that throughout this session. And if we don't get to your question during the session, we'll do our best effort to make sure it's addressed. So with that, and if everybody could just mute themselves, that would be wonderful. Thanks. Why don't we get started? So thanks, Eric, for being here.
You're welcome. Thanks for asking me to join in and provide information.
Yeah. So why don't we start out? Tell us a little bit about the history of the office. Kind of what's the intent of these types of entities?
Well, the General Assembly created the office in 2020. I was appointed by Governor Northam in June of 2021 to start the office. It was a recommendation from the JLARC report that came out in 2018. Looking at
Tell us what JLARC is. Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you when you do acronyms.
Joint Legislative Audit and Review Committee. It's a agency under the legislative branch that looks at agencies within the executive branch and looks for ways to be able to improve the way government serves constituents. And so they had done a study on Virginia's foster care system and came out with a report back in 2018 with a whole bunch of recommendations, I think 30 plus recommendations. And a lot of those recommendations were put into statute and other policy changes following that report. But one of the recommendations was the creation of this office to provide constituents within Virginia an opportunity to be able to complain to somebody or submit concerns about the way that local departments of social services or Virginia Department of Social Services or licensed child placing agencies, the way that they handle cases involving children who are receiving child protective services or who are in foster care. As a way, independent office to be created that's independent from social services to provide that avenue for folks to be able to either seek resolution to an issue or to get more information or to complain and have an investigation into the actions of those agencies regarding those children, those cases. So we were created, again, like I said, by the General Assembly as a result of that recommendation. We were funded. And then again, I was appointed in 2021 into building the office up since then to try to meet our statutory goal. Goals which include investigate, advocate, and educate. We educate folks about the child welfare system. We advocate for changes in laws or policy that can improve the child welfare system here in Virginia. And of course, the bulk of our work is responding to constituents' complaints and investigating when necessary. So that's what we do.
Awesome. That's a lot. So
what I try to do.
What kind of workload and kind of what are the, I'm sure you've seen since you started taking calls, but what's your current workload? Kind of where did it start and how has that changed? And what kind of staffing do you have to manage that?
Well, I've got, let's see, there's 5 of us total, working 4 full-time folks, including myself, 2 investigators, and a policy analyst, and a part-time intake person. The first fiscal year that we were in operation, we received 168 complaints. In FY 2023, our second year in operation, we received 446. And I don't have the numbers current for this year yet. But we have, let's see. Hang on. We received 128 complaints just in the last quarter 3, which was January 1 to March 31st, and it's been pretty steady. I think we received about 140 in the previous quarter, and right about that number in the first quarter. So you can see that we're increasing the number of complaints that we receive as more people become aware of the office. I think
And are
I
you
answered
gonna
all your
be-
questions.
Sorry to cut you off. Are you going to be getting any more staff this fiscal year?
So I asked for 2 more full-time people. We made that request to the governor. He permitted 1 and put 1 in, 1 full-time person in his budget. And the General Assembly approved it. So as soon as they are able to negotiate a budget and get that passed, I will be able to hire another full-time person.
Excellent. And what position will that be? Will that be another investigator?
It's going to be a formative investigator. I already have somebody in mind that has a vast experience, and will be able to help us triage the complaints that we receive, identify issues, and be able to help hopefully with the child fatality notices that I get that I really don't have the resources to be able to spend the time on like I'd really like to at this point. And those child fatality notices that we get are specific to cases where the child fatality is suspected to have been caused by abuse or neglect, and when the family has had prior experience with DSS, either CPS or foster care. So we get a specific and discrete number of child fatality notices that we have authority to investigate. I just have not had the resources to be able to take the deep dives into them like I'd like to. So hopefully this new staff person will be able to take some of that work.
That's great. And I know our State Department of Social Services is also looking at kind of how to kind of coordinate that work a lot better too. So hopefully we'll
They
have
are.
some good data
Yep.
around some of those cases in the next coming years. That's great. Can you talk a little bit, and I know you've done this because you and I have chatted outside of this venue before, but can you talk a little bit about kind of what other states are doing with these offices or similar efforts that exist or other states are considering? Like kind of where did this whole general idea come out of? Is there kind of an original state that has been doing this a long time, doing it well?
Well, I think there's about 20, almost 30 states that have something like this office in play. I know Kansas, I think, is the newest one, and I think their legislation may have just passed just recently in the past couple of months to create an office. But most of the other states like Georgia, Colorado, Michigan that come to mind, they were in Maine, they were all started as a result of some child fatality that occurred, like a child in foster care or a child that was involved in an ongoing CPS case. And so there was some tragedy like that occurred, and a lot of publicity about it. And then the state would have this idea to start an ombuds office to be able to look into those specific cases. So I know like Washington State, particularly was a result of some child fatalities that occurred. And like I said, some of the other states like Colorado, Georgia, and Michigan were similarly started. And then other states started picking up on it, just because I think there was, no opportunity for folks to be able to complain, or they were internal. So the offices were internal to DSS and not really independent. And so, I say we've got 20 or 30 states that have it. a lot of them are within the DSS realm, so they're not really independent. They're more like our constituent services that we have here in Virginia. And it's not independent like us. I would say about half of that number, maybe a little bit more, maybe 2/3 of that number of states that have child welfare ombuds offices are independent, maybe situated within the legislature or within the executive branch, but independent of social services.
So your office is located in the governor's office, is that correct?
That's right. I mean, the statute really doesn't say where we live. I think that's where the governor, Northam administration, where they decided to put it. And I think it's mainly for administration purposes, so that we have the support that we need through IT or HR.
Can you take us through like just the process? I'm curious to know more about the process. So if a case comes in, how could you take us through like a mock process of how a case might come in and what types of steps your office does? Oh, you're muted.
That was bizarre. That did it by itself. Ghost in the machine. So we have 3 different ways for folks to contact us. Our website has an online complaint form they can fill out. It also has a link to a PDF form that they can fill out and email it to us. Or they can send an email directly to us. We usually send the form for them to fill out once they email us, and they can call us. We've got a state hotline. All that's on our website, oco.virginia.gov. So we receive the complaint. If the form is not filled out, we'll have them fill it out for us, because one important piece of it is a consent. Would they consent to us to share their identity and their information with the agency that they're complaining about? And because the statute says all our information is confidential, but we don't want to reveal who that person is, who the complainant is, without their consent. So we get them to consent to that or not to consent to that. Some folks are fearful of retaliation if they complain to us, and so they choose not to consent. And that's why we do have that conversation with them. We want to make sure that they are consenting when they, fully have full disclosure about what could happen if they were to consent to that. There is a statute that says there shouldn't be any retaliation. The agencies can't retaliate against them, but some folks are still fearful of that. So we're very careful, and that's something that we want them to be able to give to us, that consent or not to consent. So if they consent to us, whether or not they consent, we will take a look at the case records in OASIS. We have access to OASIS, thanks to our friends over at VDSS for giving us that access.
What's OASIS? Sorry.
I'm sorry. OASIS is the online database that all agencies will document all their activities with regard to a case. It's very ancient, very antiquated, and is very obsolete and very difficult to work with. But at least for our purposes, we're able to review the records. So there's a substantiation phase. We've got folks looking at the complaint. Can we substantiate what their allegations are? Some folks aren't very detailed, so we've got to look and take a look at it, take a deeper dive into the OASIS records to figure out what it is that they're complaining about, or we may ask for more information from them. A lot of complainants are very general. CPS didn't do their job, they didn't investigate, or they took my kids without valid reasons, that kind of thing. So we'll take a look at the records, try to figure out what the agency did, what information did they have at the time that they took those actions and made those decisions. And if we can figure out what happened and the agency did what they were supposed to do, we'll send a letter to the complainant letting them know this is what we found. We didn't find any actions that violated any laws or policies, and here's the reason why they took the actions. And so we'll educate the complainant about, what the agency did and why they did. Sometimes the record's not complete in the database, and so that requires us to gather more information. If that's the case, then we may initiate an investigation to find out, to gather that information so that we can provide helpful information to the complainant. And sometimes the records do indicate that maybe the agency didn't do something according to law or policy. Maybe they didn't do a CPS investigation the way they should. They didn't interview certain people. They didn't take certain steps that the policy or the laws require. And so we'll open up an investigation for that. So there's that screening process that we have to either substantiate the allegations or unsubstantiate. Once we kick it off up to the investigation phase, it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to find anything. It just means we need to gather more information. And hopefully the result of that will be, if there are findings that the agency didn't follow policy, we'll make recommendations. It's not a gotcha type of thing. It's not, so-and-so did this, and we're not out to go after any of the staff at the agency, or again, not necessarily to point fingers, but just to identify areas needing improvement. And maybe there's something that can do to fix or resolve the complainant's issues. Maybe it's just, it's too late for that. Maybe it is for future cases. Either way, it's more of we try to use it as a way for agencies to improve their practice rather than as a punishment and going after the agency, which doesn't necessarily satisfy a lot of complainants, but at least we've given them the opportunity to speak and to be able to share their concerns with somebody, to take it as an independent and unbiased look at the case and provide them information. So that's what we try to do, is help the agency improve, but also to help the complainant understand what took place, why the agency did this, if there were errors or if there was some type of violation of laws or policies. Here's what we did. Here's what we recommended.
Right. It's kind of the sunlight is the great disinfectant kind of perspective, that just kind of making information public is helpful for everybody in a lot of different ways. So what percentage of your cases, and then we're going to get into some reporting questions, but what percentage of your cases do you know, like on average, are substantiated? Like you get 100 in out of 100, what level usually gets into where you found that there's an issue at the local level? You might not know this. It's a gotcha question, maybe.
Well, let's see. If I look at, so for the latest quarter 3, January 1 to March 31st of 2024, we received 128 complaints. 5 of those complaints, we opened up investigations, which means we had to get more information because the documentation in the database was insufficient, or we identified practices that violated laws or regulations or policies. So, and that's a pretty good representation of all the complaints. 17 of those 128 were closed for lack of jurisdiction. We get a bunch of complaints about child support or private child custody matters, or issues about guardians ad litem or judges that we don't have any jurisdiction over. So we don't have those, they can't go any further. So 17 of the 128 in quarter 3 were closed for those reasons. 23 were closed at the screening at the initial, at our initial stage, because they are unsubstantiated. And that just means that we looked at the relevant allegations or looked at the relevant documents pertaining to the allegations. And we found that the agency's actions were consistent with state policy or laws based on the information that was provided the agency. So those were closed with letters to the complainant saying, here's what we found, here's what the agency did, and here are the rules that they were playing by. Here's the policy, or here's the law that gave them the authority to do so. So that gives you an idea of the remaining ones go to the next stage where we're taking a deeper dive and trying to figure out, where, um, trying to figure out how we can respond to the different allegations, whether it is a full-blown investigation or if it's something that maybe just a phone call to the director or the staff at the agency. Hey, can you just share with us, so that's where a lot of them live. A lot of our complaints live in that area where it's not necessarily unsubstantiated. There's something to it, but we're still trying to figure out whether or not the agency, it requires an investigation into the agency's actions. And all this to say, I mean, our processes are I'm constantly reviewing our processes and whether it's efficient and meaningful enough. And so we've gone through various stages of modifying our process to be so that we're best responsive to the complainants, but also helpful to the agencies and helpful to state DSS, which is overseeing, their regional offices provide technical assistance to the local agencies. So we want to be able to provide helpful information for them as well. So we're constantly trying to make sure our system it makes sense and effective and efficient. But
So we have a question in the chat around issues of if your office identifies that there's a law that's been broken, whether or not that's within the jurisdiction of your office to specifically look further into. Are you obligated? Is there a protocol for reporting that to the appropriate enforcement agency? Has that ever happened?
It hasn't happened. There's a statute that says if we identify any actions where there's some criminal activity that we have to notify law enforcement or a Commonwealth's attorney.
Okay.
We haven't seen that. No, it hasn't happened yet.
Okay. So let's pivot now more into the reporting part of our session. Can you tell us, I know that you spoke kind of generally about your reports, and I know you do an annual report that comes out. What in the last, I guess, year that you've done some increased reporting. So can you tell us about kind of what's been happening around that?
We've been doing quarterly reports, and that's something that I meet monthly with the governor's chief of staff. And it's something that he and Secretary Littell, who's a Secretary of Health and Human Resources in the governor's cabinet, something that they like, and this administration likes data, likes to have metrics and whatnot. And so we decided to start doing these quarterly reports to be able to provide them and the commissioner of DSS, which reminds me, I haven't sent the latest quarterly report to the commissioner this past time yet, but I will. But anyway, we do provide it to them just to give them an idea of what we're doing. I think administratively, the chief of staff wants to know that my office is doing what it's supposed to be doing and efficiently going through the complaints, responding to complaints. And so I give them those metrics. And then Secretary Littell was very interested in the subject matter. What are people complaining about and what are we finding? And so our quarterly reports are posted on our website. You'll see how they've evolved over the past year. And so the last one, again, trying to be more responsive to what Secretary Littell and Chief Getman are asking for. And it helps us to be able to gather information for our annual reports that we're required to do statutorily in October of each year.
So what are you finding? What are the trends? I'm always interested in learning about kind of trends and what you're seeing. Have you seen changes? Because when you first started, it was right kind of in the middle of the pandemic, wasn't it? What sort of changes have you seen to complaints coming into your office?
They're all, I mean, there's not really any difference. I don't see anything that's tied in with COVID or the pandemic. I think, as far as that goes, what we do see is a lot of agencies have not pivoted back to in-person meetings. with families that should be held in person. I think there are a lot of family partnership meetings that are still being held virtually or over the phone, which I think is sometimes convenient for the family if they're working. Parents have to work and can't get away to go, or maybe transportation. So it is helpful for that ability for parents to be able to participate that way. But I don't think that should be the default. And we're still seeing some agencies that are holding those very important meetings where that interaction between the family and the agency staff is really important to take place in person. And I see agencies still doing it virtually out of necessity or out of convenience rather than, really looking at ways to be able to do it in person. That's just, I don't think there's any policy out there that says do it this way, do it that way. That's my own personal view. I think these, especially family partnership meetings, should be held in person as much as possible. Again, with allowances for parents to be able to participate as they are able. But I think agencies need to make that pivot more strenuously, I think. So that's as far as the pandemic goes. But as far as the complaints go, they haven't changed. Most of them are about, CPS procedures, reasons for CPS getting involved based on lies or bias against the complainant or whatever. We see lack of responsiveness, staff not returning phone calls or emails in a timely manner, the lack of family partnership meetings being held, not engaging relatives, the alternative living arrangements, which played a huge role in a lot of the complaints that we received our first year in operation. We got a lot of complaints about ALAs, and those are the informal arrangements where CPS will come in and do a safety plan and have the family agree that the child will reside with a relative or a family friend on a temporary basis while the investigation or family assessment is conducted. We call those alternative living arrangements. They're very informal. And my first annual report, we identified a whole bunch of issues, including legal issues with that process, and just the varying practices from agency to agency. We've got 120 local agencies doing it 120 different ways. And so that was a problem because a family in one area would have one outcome and a totally different outcome if they were in a different agency. So it really, that inconsistency and ununiformity throughout the state was very troubling. And parents were left without any kind of way to get their children back in a lot of cases. So we still get those complaints. The process, either the CPS family assessment or investigation process. And then when it comes to foster care, parents and family members are not quite sure what efforts the agencies are doing to achieve a goal of either return home or placement with relatives. So there's a lot of questions about that. And we get a lot of questions about placement decisions when child in foster care, the foster placement is changed either from one foster parent to another without adequate reason or without a stated reason. So we get a lot of those complaints, especially from foster parents, and then visitation issues. So those, that has remained consistent since the beginning. We get complaints about those issues regularly.
With regard, and I know you mentioned that you just haven't had the staff to do much on this, but with regard to the fatality cases, what are the trends that you're seeing? My guess is they're probably consistent with the trends everybody else is seeing around safe sleep issues. But are there other issues? Can you talk a little bit about kind of the overall trends you're seeing in those cases? And if you've seen an increase in those, what's that looking like?
So I'm going to go off of my 2023 annual report again, because we don't have the resources to look into the current child fatality notices that we receive. I can tell you what the data is about the cases that we received, notices that we received last year. And so we had received 50 notifications of those child fatalities that met our statutory criteria. That's opposed to 31 that we received in fiscal year 2022. The ages 27 of those children that had died were between the age of birth and 6 months. 3 of them between 6 months and a year. 11 between a year to 5 years old. 5 between the ages of 5 and 12, and then 4, 12 years to 18. Now, 54% of those cases, 27 of those 50, involved parental substance use, where parental substance use was identified as an issue. And 18 of those children, 18 of the 50, were identified and reported as substance exposed at birth. So, that's the kind of data that we are collecting. The parental substance use and the substance exposed infants is a concern of mine, given that the law changed about several years ago. I think back in 2018, I think it changed, as far as what medical providers have to report as a suspicion of child abuse and neglect when a child is born substance exposed or tests positive for a substance at birth, and what the response of the local agencies should be. And so it just concerned me that there are so many of them that were born and reported as substance exposed at birth, and then being reported as child fatalities within 6 months of their life. So many of those children, the child fatalities were of children between the birth and 6 months age, just is troubling. And with the parental substance use being such a problem in a lot of these cases, I think we need to do more to protect these kids and prevent them from dying. Now, a lot of the causes of death are reported as unsafe sleep, but how many of those are really because of parental neglect? Maybe they're intoxicated due to the substance, and some of those questions we're not going to be able to answer. But the fact that so many of these cases, there is a concern identified of parental substance use, I think we can do better as far as how to respond to those cases. And so I know I've been working with Virginia Department of Social Services and the League of Social Service Executives, which represents a lot of the local agency directors and leaders, trying to figure out what we can do better when it comes to substance exposed infants. And the bottom line is that this is not just a CPS problem, it's a community problem. And so, medical providers, the medical community is part of the team here. We've got not just CPS, but we've got other government agencies that serve families, such as the community service boards or behavioral health authorities and their substance use treatment programs within those CSBs. They're all part of the problem, but they're part of resolving the problem as much as CPS is, or if not more. And so what are we doing? What are we doing wrong that these agencies, that this team of folks, the community is not stepping up? And so I think we're, I think there's some movement in looking at that system from across systems and across agencies. And I think there's some momentum here from the state level agencies that have identified this issue and are taking steps to be able to resolve these issues. And so I'm hopeful that this work in looking at the cases that we receive is going to result in some improvements in the system.
And you just touched on this a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about when cases come in where there's neglect has been identified, what those cases are looking like from your window of the world? Because there's a lot of kind of discussion around, neglect being solely focused on issues of economic insecurity. And while we absolutely know that that's a critical issue when it comes to these issues of abuse and neglect, we also the research shows that it's not the only issue. And so when you're seeing those cases of neglect, are there other mitigating, what sorts of things are you seeing?
Well, I have yet to see a case where it's just based upon a poverty-related issue, either just housing or child, coming to school dirty or in the same clothes as yesterday, those kinds of things. We don't see those cases. We don't see CPS getting involved in those cases. The cases that we see where neglect is the allegation, it is usually multiple factors. Maybe it is the dirty clothes, or lack of lunch or whatever, the food issue or whatever. It's usually that with something else. And the cases that we reviewed, there's typically parental substance use or parental mental health issues involved that exacerbate the situation. It's rarely just neglect due to the family's inability to address housing or anything poverty related. There's always something more. I've yet to see a case that is just that. But those are just the complaints that come to us.
Right, right. So let's talk a little bit about this new legislation, which I know your office was involved in helping to create. Can you talk a little bit about the kinship legislation?
Well, as I mentioned, one of the biggest issues that we identified and the complaints that we had the first year of operation were those alternative living arrangements. Again, those are the informal arrangements under a safety plan with CPS. Kids were out of home, but it wasn't foster care. And that was the big complaint that we got. A lot of comments from parents like, I thought this was foster care, but I'm being told that it wasn't. Or being told, well, this is in foster care, so we don't have to provide you services to get your child back. And those are really troubling. I mean, we didn't hear it just from one agency or one parent. We heard it from multiple parents in multiple agencies. And it basically was this hidden foster care. It was this informal foster care arrangement. You're removing the children without really proving to the court that the removal was proper or necessary. And maybe it was. It just they didn't go to court to get that authorized. And we have a system in place for that because of the various interests that are involved, not just child safety, but parents' rights. I mean, we can't go in unless there's a really good reason. We, as in government, can't go in unless there's a very good reason. And, child abuse obviously is a good reason, child abuse and neglect. But we've got to go to court to say, it's this bad, judge, that we got to take the child away from the parents because the parents' constitutional rights are also very, very serious. But the kinship, the ALAs, the informal arrangements really didn't follow that. It was voluntary. It was, hey, mom or dad, we could put this child in foster care, or you could find somebody to take them on a temporary basis. And so it is voluntary because the parents do come up with the names of folks to take care of the children, but it's really kind of coercive. So it is troubling. It's a troubling practice. And what other issues were is that there was no timeline. Maybe once the child got into the care of the caregiver, the relative, sometimes the agency just closed the case and let the family fend for themselves after that, providing no services to anyone. Other agencies kept them open forever. We had a couple of cases that were like 2 or 3 years out, and the children had been placed with this relative and then with another relative, then with another person, family friend, several times without any kind of oversight over that. And so there are a lot of problems with it. And so we got into a discussion with the folks at VDSS, with the League of Social Service Executives, people who are doing this. And, I heard from local agencies that said, well, we need to have options. We need to be able to do this because going to foster care and pulling that trigger, all of a sudden we got judges and lawyers and CASAs and a whole bunch of other people that take away the control from the family. And one thing that they really wanted to have is, to allow the family to have control over the case. But once it goes to court, you lose a lot of that control. And, I think there's some truth to that. And I think there's some merit in trying to keep control within the family. And so I think there's a solution here. And that's what we worked on for the past couple of years was what do we need to do to fix this? Agencies are going to still do this. So we need to provide guardrails. And we, so that, there was multiple fronts in trying to tackle this. There was a movement here at the governor's office to find a solution to kinship care. There was the discussions that I was having with the local agencies and with VDSS about this. And a lot of this work goes back 10 years trying to fix this. So there was that. And then in the past few years, Senator Favola has been trying to add legislation. She would introduce bills that would try to support kinship care. And so she was a champion to try to get something in place in law to really formalize kinship care. And so all these fronts sort of came together this past General Assembly, and we got Senator Favola to carry Senate Bill 39. Delegate Coulson out of Charlottesville, who's an agency attorney, DSS agency attorney, and a new delegate this year. She carried House Bill 27. And then Senators Obenshain and McDougal also carried bills to try to fix kinship care. And the efforts of the governor's office and all this stuff came together. We were able to get Senator Favola and Delegate Coulson to carry the governor's version of the bill, fixing kinship care and addressing ALAs. Senators Obenshain and McDougal joined in as well. And they passed this with unanimous support from both houses, from both parties. It just was really amazing to see the work be done to get the support for this bill. But what it does, it formalizes and provides guardrails around this process. So there's still an option for local agencies to do an informal process along with the family to keep children out of formal foster care. But it provides a timeline. It can't go on forever. You have to provide services. There's financial support that the governor approved in this budget, and the General Assembly affirmed financial support for kinship care providers in an informal arrangement. Service plans for the parents to get the children back. And it also prioritizes kinship care when the child does enter formal foster care. So it tackles the issues with the informal process, provides a timeline, and provides a way for parents to process rights, because court has to be initiated if it lasts a certain amount of time. You have to go to court if this is going to be a long-term thing. And so it's a compromise. I'm not happy with it. I know a lot of other advocates are not happy with it. It's not going to be perfect. We're going to be having to tweak it in the coming years, but it's a start to getting things right and doing right by everybody involved because of the competing interests that we've got. We've got kids. We don't want them going into foster care. When we do, we want them to be relatives. But if there's an informal way and it's a temporary arrangement, why not let them go with a family member or a family friend that they're familiar with? Lessen and mitigate the trauma that they're going to go over. And it provides just another tool in the toolbox, another option. But the important thing for me is that agencies need to be having these conversations with the family, not just the parents, but also the proposed relative caregivers or family friends, and say, what do you guys need? Can you do this informally? Do we need to go to foster care? Going to foster care is not bad. It's not evil. We can do it as long as we do it right. The child can go into formal foster care, but still be placed with kinship care provider. We can do that. What are the family's needs and what is the way forward? And it gives agencies the different options to be able to think about to meet those families' needs. So that's why I supported it. is because it does provide options. But it also lets family members, parents, and caregivers, relatives know what to expect and what other options there are.
And it seems like it's also an attempt. I mean, a lot of the challenge, and this is actually what I'm asking you now, is to kind of put on your attorney hat or legal hat around kind of Virginia's system in child welfare. It's not the same system in every state. So Virginia has the state supervised, locally administered kind of way of doing things, which I always get confused with the name because it feels like it's actually the opposite. It feels like the state kind of provides a high level of guidance and best practice information outside of like federal requirements, and it's really up to the localities. They have a great deal of discretion in how they implement a lot of these practices. Would you say that that's accurate, Eric? And how is
Yeah.
that? Is that a factor in kind of some of these issues that people are facing? How many departments of social services are there in the state of Virginia?
120
Yep,
local
it's
agencies, which is
120 different responses to these cases very often. I mean, there's general kind of, consistency, but there's a lot of autonomy within 100, and there's a lot of funding issues too, right? So can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges with that, and if you're familiar with other states and how they're working through that, or if they are? I know there are pluses and minuses to that.
Yeah, there's definitely pluses and minuses to our system. We're only one of 9 or 10 other states, total states, that are locally administered like this, state supervised. So we're rare. But the funding situation comes into play. We see it most when a family moves from one jurisdiction to another. And there's all kinds of rules with regard to who provides the services. Is it the original DSS or is it the new DSS agency? There are complications with CSA. So if some of those services are being funded by CSA, you got to transfer between different CSA offices. That's a problem. So we see those problems.
What's CSA, Eric? What's CSA? Tell us.
I'm
CSA.
sorry, there's another acronym. All right, Children's Services Act. A lot of families know that as the family, what is it? Assessment and Planning Team, the FAPT meetings. It's a really complex system that it would take me a half a day to explain what it is. But it provides services for families who are at risk or children who are at risk of going into care or who are already in foster care. So it provides a funding stream of local, state, and some federal monies that can go into providing, well, not federal, but state and local monies that go into providing services for families. So, that is a complex law, and going from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, you're going to get inconsistencies there as well. Non-uniformity, and just transferring the services is difficult, and families run into a lot of obstacles in accessing services when they do move. So that's a big problem.
And we're getting a lot of comments about kind of individual stories and experiences that folks have had, kind of working through this system. I know that part of the issue that you just touched on with the CSA is that in the funding associated with services also varies significantly. Is that correct? From locality to locality?
Right. So we're seeing, in the level of services provided by agency staff, as well as the resources of private service providers within the community varies from agency to agency. And when it comes to the services provided by the agency staff, that could mean, how responsive are they to the family? Are they, meeting with the children, meeting with the parents on a regular basis? Are they connecting parents with the services they need? Are they connecting the children with the services they need? Are they making sure, Medicaid or the costs are being taken care of? Those kinds of things that are involved in case management, that varies from agency to agency. Some agencies do very little. Here's a list of resources in our community. Go ahead, good luck. Let me know which one you settle on. As opposed to others who, we talked to one worker, foster care worker, who we were so impressed by her response. because she said, I'm going to do what I can because I don't want to be the barrier to achieving the goal. And just was very impressed with what she did, or as opposed to some agencies where the lack of work on the agency staff person created huge barriers to achieve the goal. So it varies from agency to agency. So we see that. But then, the bigger issue, a bigger issue is that in widely seen issue is the lack of services, the lack of service providers, the wait lists for therapists and counseling or substance abuse treatment. Families not able to access them for months, or just a lot of barriers like transportation because there's no public transportation for families to get to the service providers. So we see a variety of that varies from agency and locality to locality.
So, can you talk a little bit about what other states that you've talked to as far as this work goes? Are they seeing similar types of things? Is Virginia unique in any of this, or is this kind of consistent?
Yeah, I'm part of the United States Ombuds Association and their Children and Families chapter that meets monthly. Every month we meet, and there are about 100 representatives from children or child welfare ombuds offices throughout the country that participate in this monthly meeting. They're seeing the same issues that we are with regard to service provision that I just talked about, wait lists. They're having the same issues with children living and residing in offices or hotels. Some of them are even worse than what we're experiencing here in Virginia. But they're seeing the same issues, not having enough foster parents, not having enough placements, residential congregate care placements, willing to take the kids. They're having the same issues with the kids having such serious mental health and behavioral health issues. So they're seeing the same issues that we are across the board. The agencies or the states that have the state administered programs aren't seeing some of the lack of uniformity and lack of consistency that we are, although they do have some of that within their regions. But for the most part, a lot of the issues that we see are not necessarily they're seeing because of their state administered programs. But as far as the big overall issues, like I just mentioned, I mean, state to state, we're no different, unfortunately. Challenges that we're seeing with our kids and some of our families are the same that other states are having.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and there's a comment in here about, kind of connecting with community, increasing connections with community resources. And I know that from, this session, I'm thinking already about another lunch and learn we could do. And we have some of our colleagues here from DSS that could tell us about some of the federal changes in legislation around the Family First initiative and how that's going in Virginia. And that's a whole nother lunch and learn, but that really, I think, speaks to some of these issues and kind of focusing a little more upstream with helping families. But I think also that, your office really is intended to be tertiary prevention. It's kind of at the end of when something bad has already happened, whether or not that's something bad, something bad has happened to the family, and whether or not that's something that has happened as related to the individual behavior within the family or within the system and how they mishandled a situation. It's really after a situation takes place. And I think that, through some of our comments, I think that we should definitely, and we're going to, because Facts Focus is really looking at issues across the prevention spectrum, but I think it's important to recognize that you can only do what you can do in your office. And some of these systems, I mean, I'm constantly saying that, we look to CPS. It's like we look to the schools to fix everything else in communities that we sometimes have neglected. And, if you don't have housing and you don't have transportation and you don't have access to mental health and you don't have parent support and all of these things that provide all of the kind of foundation to support families and support kids, then things fall apart quickly. and oftentimes it's left on the kind of tertiary folks, like the folks in your office and in social services, to try and cobble together all the stuff that, sometimes generationally has been lacking. So it's a tough order, and it's tough to kind of communicate, the complexities associated with some of this. So yeah, can you talk? We have 5 minutes left. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what sorts of things you think moving forward in the future could be implemented outside of this. I think everybody is in concurrence around the need for more kind of secondary and primary prevention efforts, but what sorts of things do you think immediately, like in the next, maybe 5 years, you think could happen in Virginia that could really improve the response to some of these cases?
Well, if we can get a training academy for workers, I know that was part of the General Assembly's budget. It's sort of in limbo right now, not quite sure where we're going to end up, but I think training is huge. Going back to my comments about COVID, one of the big effects of COVID and pandemic is we lost a lot of people with experience at the local agencies. And with that, a lot of experience and people, mentors for the newer workers that were coming in, and we've lost that. A lot of agencies don't have that. And so a lot of the supervisors that are in place right now don't have a lot of experience, and they're supervising even greener workers that don't have a firm grasp on what it takes to make these kinds of really important life-changing decisions in families. And so we need to get a quality workforce up and running. And the training academy was one way we were hoping to be able to boost that up. We need to be able to get qualified workers with backgrounds that can do this work. We need to have agencies be able to hire them, whether that's pay or whatever else they need to get a staff. These are really important decisions. There's a move toward getting rid of child protective services or foster care. That's not likely. There's always going to be need for this. If we're going to do it, we got to do it right, but it takes a good qualified work staff to be able to do it. So we need to support the local agencies. We need to support staffing, training, continuing education, and all that, being trauma informed, all those important things that we need our workers to do. We need to stop building silos and tear down the silos that we have within the agencies. That's something that really came to a surprise to me. Is one thing that we're seeing is how, within an agency, CPS is siloed off from foster care and vice versa, or whatever, or CPS investigations are siloed from ongoing. That doesn't make any sense either. So the silos within the agency and the silos with other child serving agencies like the schools, like the CSPs, like juvenile justice, stop siloing ourselves and work together, because these are the community's children. So that's going to improve. And where we see that happening, local agencies, there are certain localities that have torn down those silos, they get better outcomes because they're able to work together. We need to do that across the board in all 120 jurisdictions as social services serves. So I think that needs to happen. Those are the two big things that I think will cause, huge improvements to be made to the system.
Yeah, and I know that training academy, we have 2 minutes left. Could you talk just for 1 minute about how would that change? Like, what is that? What is the training academy, and how could that be helpful?
I can't really speak to that. Maybe folks from VDSS would be able to speak to it better, but it's better than what we have now, which are online courses or, I don't know exactly what new workers, what training they go to, but unfortunately, because of the need for workers, they get very little training before they're put out and given cases. And so the training academy would replace that. They would be getting, this really intense, and I'm hoping in-person training about all aspects of whether it's CPS or foster care, about family services, where, they're getting the training before they even take cases. It's
Right, and our list is growing as far as resources to share. But I think what we'll do is we'll make sure that we have some of these resources posted on our website. And we've gotten some folks that have some specific questions, and we're happy to respond to emails related to resources and information to some of those questions. So we'll make sure that that information gets out to the best of our ability. So thank you so much. Boy, the hour kind of just flew by, Eric. I knew it would. But I really appreciate all of your work, and I appreciate your time. And this was, I think, a good start to these monthly lunch and learns that we're going to be hosting. So appreciate y'all. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.